Still, the door locked behind me on Christmas, and I knew my own son and his wife had turned family into a wager. As I stood there, clutching my purse, I didn't cry or argue, just lifted my chin and stayed quiet. While the lock clicked in the cold air, the sound carried years of dinners, favors, and loyalty I'd given them. The same click followed me down the steps, reminding me how easily a mother becomes expendable. That's when I realized they weren't betting on my tears, they were betting I'd always forgive. Still hearing that lock in my head, I chose my gift to them, a life where they no longer existed. We're about to begin, but if you'd like, share where you're joining from. It reminds me this story doesn't echo into silence, it lands somewhere real. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. Carolyn stepped out of her car into the biting December chill. Her breath formed clouds in the air as she walked up the path to Eric and Jessica's house. The festive lights twinkled from the eaves, and the scent of pine and turkey wafted from the door. Christmas, supposed to be a time for warmth and family, felt hollow in her chest. But she ignored it. It was just a dinner. She'd survive. She always did. Eric greeted her at the door, his usual smile stretched thin. "Hey, Mom, glad you could make it," he said, stepping aside. "Thanks, Eric," Carolyn replied, brushing past him. Inside, the warmth of the house wrapped around her like an old, familiar blanket. She spotted Lily immediately, her 8-year-old granddaughter, sitting by the fireplace, hugging a stuffed reindeer. Carolyn's heart swelled a little. There was at least one piece of this family that still felt right. "Lily, sweetheart," Carolyn called softly. The little girl looked up, beamed, and ran to her grandmother. Carolyn bent down to hug her tight, savoring the feeling of the child's innocent affection. Across the room, Jessica was setting the table, her eyes flicking up for a brief, almost imperceptible moment. "Mom," she said, her voice too sweet. "You look good." Carolyn forced a smile, though she felt the underlying tension in Jessica's tone. Something was off. The dinner started with small talk, superficial chatter about the weather, work, the holidays, but beneath the surface, Carolyn could feel the coolness in the air. Jessica was watching her too closely, the edges of her smile sharp, like she was calculating something. Eric, who used to be her confidant, was quiet, his eyes darting uneasily between Carolyn and his wife. After a while, Jessica set down her wine glass with a soft clink. "How about a game?" she suggested, her voice coated in sweetness that didn't match her expression. "A game?" Carolyn asked, raising an eyebrow. "Yeah," Jessica replied, her smile never wavering. "Let's make it interesting." She turned to Eric, and they shared a look, one that made Carolyn's skin crawl. "A little bet," Eric added, leaning back in his chair, looking almost too relaxed. "We'll bet on whether or not you'll cry when we ask you to leave. You know, because you're so independent and all." The words hit Carolyn like a punch to the gut. "Leave?" she echoed, her voice small, even though her insides were tightening in anger. Jessica's eyes sparkled with cruel amusement. "Yeah, it'll be a test. We want to see if you'll break down. Beg us to let you stay." Carolyn's breath caught in her throat. The weight of it sank, and this wasn't a joke. This was a game designed to humiliate her, to tear down the last shred of dignity she had left in this house. Her hands clenched around her fork, the weight of it digging into her palm. They really thought she would cry, beg them, but they were wrong. She stood up abruptly, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I'm not playing your game," she said, her voice steady, though her heart pounded in her chest. Eric's face shifted briefly, guilt flickering behind his eyes, but he quickly masked it. "Mom, it was just a joke." "I'm done with your games," Carolyn said, her voice cold as ice. She turned toward the door, ignoring the stunned silence behind her. Stepping out onto the porch, Carolyn felt the cold air hit her face, but the real chill was inside, settling deep. She wasn't crying, she wasn't begging, but she knew one thing. Things were never going to be the same. The door closed with a sharp click behind her, and Carolyn stood on the porch, the cold air slicing into her skin. The frosty wind tugged at her coat, but it was nothing compared to the chill that had settled deep in her chest. She wanted to collapse, to let her emotions spill out in front of them, to give in to the raw hurt. But she couldn't. Not now. Not after what they had just done. She took a slow breath, trying to steady her hands, which were shaking at her sides. Her vision blurred for a moment, the harsh sting of tears threatening to rise. But no, she would not cry. Not for them. Not for that. Carolyn clenched her fists at her sides, the cold air biting through her gloves. From inside, she could hear the muffled sounds of voices, Eric's low, uncomfortable murmur, and Jessica's sharp laugh. She could almost picture their smug smiles, their casual dismissal of her as she left. They thought they'd broken her. They thought she would beg, but that was the last thing they were going to see. Carolyn picked up her purse from the ground where she'd dropped it earlier, the leather strap cold against her fingers. She moved slowly, deliberately, through the steps of gathering her things, the motions calming her even as her heart hammered in her chest. Every inch of her body screamed to turn around, to go back inside, to demand an apology, but she knew that wouldn't fix anything. She was done. She couldn't go back. Eric's voice, faint and uncertain, drifted out through the crack in the door. "Mom, you don't have to leave. It was just a—" But it didn't matter. The door was locked, and he wasn't coming after her. The house had already swallowed up her last shred of hope. She turned, her boots crunching on the frost-covered steps, and walked toward the driveway. The air seemed to grow colder as she made her way to her car, her breath coming in shallow bursts. The streetlights flickered faintly in the distance, casting long, pale shadows on the empty sidewalk. Carolyn felt the weight of the night settle on her shoulders, but she refused to bend beneath it. As she reached her car, she paused, one hand resting on the cold metal of the door. It was then, as if on cue, that she glanced up and saw the faint silhouette of Jessica through the window. Jessica stood by the dining table, her hands resting on her hips, her eyes locked onto Carolyn's figure. That smile, that smug, self-satisfied smile that had never seemed so cruel. A sick feeling twisted in Carolyn's gut. Jessica was watching her, waiting, almost. Carolyn could almost hear her thoughts. "I knew you'd walk away. I knew you couldn't take it." For a long moment, Carolyn just stood there, staring back at the smug figure. Then, her phone vibrated in her pocket, breaking the spell. She fumbled to pull it out, her fingers stiff from the cold. It was a message from Sandra. "You okay?" The simple text sent a jolt through her. She could feel the warmth of Sandra's concern, even through the phone screen. The thought of her friend, her rock, steadied her in that moment. Carolyn swallowed hard. "Not really," she typed back. "But I'm done. I'm done with them." Her thumb hovered over the screen for a moment before she added, "I need to get out of here. Can I come by?" Almost immediately, Sandra's reply pinged back. "Of course. You know you don't have to ask. Come when you're ready." Carolyn exhaled sharply, a strange mix of relief and pain flooding her chest. She looked back toward the house, where the light still burned in the window, where Jessica's figure lingered like a shadow. The thought of facing them again, of hearing their voices, their mockery was too much to bear. She didn't need their validation. She didn't need their approval. What she needed now was a break from it all. Time to think, to breathe, to remember who she was without the weight of their cruelty bearing down on her. Without another glance, Carolyn opened the car door and slid behind the wheel. The engine sputtered to life, the hum of the car providing a brief sense of warmth. She drove through the streets of their suburban neighborhood, the twinkling lights outside her window a reminder of the family she once thought she knew. But tonight, that family felt like a distant memory. As she turned onto the quiet road toward the park, she could feel the rawness in her chest, the deep ache that had been festering there for years but had finally broken through the surface. She wasn't crying. She wouldn't give them that satisfaction. But as the park loomed in front of her, she couldn't help but wonder what the hell she was supposed to do now. Was this the end? Or was it just the beginning? Carolyn's hands shook as she opened the door to Darren's office, stepping into the familiar warmth of the space. The old leather chairs, the dark wood desk, it all felt comforting, like a place where things could finally be made right. Darren stood when she walked in, his face softening at the sight of her. "You look like you've been through hell," he said, his voice quiet, concerned. Carolyn gave a tight nod, her eyes hard. I have. But I'm done. It's time to make sure Eric and Jessica can't hurt me anymore. Darren's expression shifted, a knowing look settling on his face. I'm glad to hear that. We've talked before about your assets. Your will? She met his gaze. I'm ready. I want them out. Completely. Darren sat down behind his desk and pulled open a drawer. He took out a folder, flipping it open. All right, let's go over this step by step. First, we need to revise your will. Eric and Jessica can't be in it anymore. If you're serious about this, we'll make sure that there's no way they can touch anything money, property, anything. The words hit Carolyn hard. She'd spent years building a life for her family, and now she was severing it all. It was painful, but it was also liberating. Yes, she said firmly. I want everything to go to Lily, not them. Darren nodded, jotting down notes. We can do that. We'll also set up a trust for Lily, something that can't be touched until she's older, and make sure it's airtight. They won't get a penny. Carolyn felt a strange sense of relief wash over her. Cutting them out was a tough decision, but it was the only one. They had already proven how little they cared for her, and now it was time for her to stop caring about them. Also, Darren continued, we'll need to arrange a power of attorney. You'll be the only one with control. Over any decisions, no one, not even Eric, can manipulate you again. Carolyn's chest tightened with both fear and resolve. I need to be completely free of them. I can't let them have that kind of power over me anymore. Good, Darren said, a hint of approval in his voice. This is the right move. And once all that's done, we'll have a financial advisor review everything. Assets, investments, your property. We'll make sure there's nothing left to chance. Carolyn nodded. Every word felt like a step toward her freedom. The plan was forming, piece by piece. She could already feel the weight lifting off her shoulders. Darren slid the folder across the desk, and she took it with both hands. This is everything you need to get started. We'll set up the meetings with the financial advisor and make sure your will is rewritten properly. Carolyn stood, feeling lighter than she had in months. Thank you, she said, her voice firm with determination. As she stepped out into the cool air, the folder clutched tightly in her hand, she knew that the hardest part was over. She was taking control. But as the wind bit at her skin, a nagging thought surfaced. What would Eric and Jessica do when they found out? It didn't matter. She was ready for whatever came next. Carolyn sat across from Darren, her hands steady as she signed the papers, each stroke of the pen pulling her further away from the life she had known. The decision to remove Eric and Jessica from her power of attorney felt more real now, more permanent. No longer would they control her decisions or manipulate her into submission. You're doing the right thing, Darren said, watching her sign the final document. You'll have complete control from now on. They won't be able to touch anything. Carolyn didn't respond at first. Instead, she glanced at the folder in her hands where the will had been updated. The trust for Lily was set secure and untouchable until her granddaughter turned 21. Carolyn felt a strange sense of calm wash over her as the weight of the legal changes settled in. It was over. She was free. As Darren shuffled papers, she thought about her next steps. It wasn't just about the legal changes, it was about what came after. She couldn't stay here. This house, these memories, they were suffocating her now. She needed to start fresh. Before leaving Darren's office, he slid a final paper across the desk. You're going to need a financial advisor to finalize everything assets, investments, and property. We'll make sure it's all buttoned up. Carolyn nodded, taking the paper, the last piece of the puzzle falling into place. She was done. The past was behind her. When she arrived home, the silence greeted her like an old friend. It felt different now. The familiar corners of the house, once filled with laughter and the promise of family, now seemed cold, foreign. She wandered through the rooms, feeling the weight of the memories of birthdays, holidays, and the moments she had once thought were unbreakable. She found herself in the living room, where photo albums lined the shelves. Pulling one down, she slowly flipped through it. There was Eric as a child, smiling up at her, his eyes wide with innocence. And Jessica, always poised, always perfect. A part of Carolyn wanted to feel the warmth of those memories, but another part felt suffocated by them. They had used her. They had taken everything, and now they were gone. Her phone buzzed, jolting her from her thoughts. It was Sandra. "Lily's asking for you. She misses you." Carolyn smiled, a lump forming in her throat. "I miss her too," she quickly typed back. She grabbed her coat and keys, making her way to Sandra's house. The thought of holding Lily, of feeling her little arms around her, was the only thing that made sense right now. It was the future she could still control, the one that wasn't tainted by Eric and Jessica's cruelty. When she arrived at Sandra's, Lily came rushing out to her, a wide grin on her face. Carolyn bent down, lifting her granddaughter into her arms, her heart swelling with love. For the first time in days, she felt a sense of peace. But as she held Lily, her phone buzzed again. An unknown number. Carolyn hesitated, her stomach tightening. She answered. "Carolyn, it's Eric," the voice said. "We need to talk." A chill ran down Carolyn's spine. What could they possibly want now? The moment Carolyn stepped inside her house, her phone buzzed again. She hesitated, her hand tightening around the device. This time, it wasn't an unknown number. It was a notification from Facebook. She unlocked the screen, her pulse quickening. It was from Eric. The post appeared at the top of her feed. A bright family photo, perfectly staged. Eric, Jessica, and Lily were all smiling, the holiday decorations sparkling behind them. The caption read, "A Christmas miracle, no more drama." The words hit Carolyn like a slap. Her stomach twisted, bile rising in her throat. No more drama. The irony of it. After everything they'd done, after kicking her out like a burden, they had the audacity to paint themselves as the victims. They were trying to make her the problem. It was infuriating. She stared at the image, feeling the weight of their smugness seep through the screen. Jessica's smile was tight, calculated. Eric's eyes, though there was something distant about them, she saw it, even in the photo. He was still torn, but the mask was there. They both wore it. And Lily, sweet Lily, was caught in the middle, blissfully unaware of the games her parents were playing. A surge of anger swept over Carolyn, but it wasn't just anger. It was clarity. She wasn't going to let them control the narrative. Not this time. Not when they had tried to humiliate her in front of everyone. Carolyn's thumb hovered over the keyboard. She had spent so many years biting her tongue, swallowing the pain, keeping the peace. But this was different. They had crossed a line. Now, it was her turn to speak up. She began typing, her fingers steady despite the storm of emotions in her chest. "I was kicked out of my son's home on Christmas Day, all for a sick bet." The bet? Whether or not I would cry when they asked me to leave. They made a joke out of me, but I won't be silent about it. Family should be built on respect, not manipulation. I'll never be part of that again. This is the real story, and I won't let them hide behind their perfect photos. I won't be their victim anymore. If you want to know the truth, this is it. Carolyn sat back, staring at the post for a long moment. She wasn't crying. She wasn't angry in the way she used to be. This was something different. This was calm. This was controlled. She hit post and watched as her words went live. At first, nothing happened. The minutes dragged on, the only sound, the quiet hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Then, slowly, the notifications started to trickle in. A like, a comment, a message, then more. "I had no idea, Carolyn. I'm so sorry this happened to you. You're so strong. Thank you for sharing your side. I can't believe they would do that. You deserve so much better." The comments kept coming. And then, Carolyn saw it, the first person to share her post. Sandra. Her heart swelled with gratitude, knowing that her closest friend was supporting her. But then, something even more unexpected happened. Distant cousins, old friends from work, people she hadn't spoken to in years began commenting too. Messages of support, of understanding, even anger at Eric and Jessica's cruelty. She felt a strange warmth spread through her as the words of strangers poured in. They didn't know her fully, but they believed her. They were standing by her. And then came the private messages, some from family members who hadn't known the truth, some who had been on Eric's side, some who hadn't spoken to her in years. They all started to reach out, offering their condolences, expressing disbelief at what she had been through. Her phone buzzed again, but this time it wasn't a notification. It was a text from Sandra. "You've got this. You're showing them who you really are." Carolyn looked at her phone, the realization hitting her like a rush of cold water. She wasn't alone. Not anymore. The support pouring in was more than she had ever expected. Her side of the story was out there now. People knew. But as the flood of messages continued, another notification caught her eye. A comment from Jessica. "This is disgusting, Carolyn. You're turning a private family matter into a public spectacle. You're ruining Christmas. Don't drag us into your drama." The words stung, and for a moment, Carolyn felt her heart clench. But then she steadied herself. This was their game, and she wasn't going to play by their rules anymore. Her finger hovered over the phone for a moment. She wasn't going to let them win. Not anymore. Instead of replying, Carolyn closed the app, feeling the first flicker of a smile tug at the corners of her mouth. She wasn't afraid of them anymore. And this was just the beginning. Her phone buzzed again, but she wasn't ready to look. Not yet. She had finally found her voice. Carolyn sat at her kitchen table, phone in hand, watching the flood of notifications roll in. Her post had gone viral, and the reactions were overwhelming. Each new notification brought a mix of shock, disbelief, and support. Friends, family, co-workers all reaching out, expressing outrage at what Eric and Jessica had done. It was almost too much to process. For years, Carolyn had kept her pain hidden, trying to protect the family, trying to keep things intact. But now, the world was seeing the truth, her truth. As the hours passed, more and more comments appeared. "I had no idea. I'm so sorry, Carolyn. You're so brave for sharing this." The warmth of strangers' support was almost surreal. She didn't feel alone anymore. She felt seen. But the most satisfying part? Eric and Jessica were being flooded with criticism. Their social media pages, once polished, perfect, were now filled with angry messages. "How could you treat your own mother like that? This is appalling. You're the ones causing the drama, not her." The irony of it wasn't lost on Carolyn. They had painted her as the problem, tried to humiliate her in front of everyone. And now, the tide was turning. She was no longer the silent one, the obedient mother. She had found her voice, and it was loud. Then, the phone rang. Carolyn didn't need to check the caller ID. She already knew it was Eric. She answered, her voice calm. "Hello? Mom, you need to take that post down." Eric's voice was strained, laced with frustration. "It's causing a lot of problems for the family." Carolyn's grip tightened on the phone, but her tone remained steady. "It's not about the family anymore, Eric. It's about respect. You tried to turn me into the villain, and I won't let you do that. Not anymore." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Carolyn could hear the low hum of Jessica's voice in the background, but Eric didn't respond right away. "Mom, you're ruining everything. This is private," Eric finally said, his voice raising slightly. "No," Carolyn said firmly. "You made it public when you kicked me out, when you made that bet. You wanted to embarrass me. I'm not going to be silent anymore." She ended the call without waiting for a response, her decision final. Almost immediately, another message popped up, this time from Jessica. "This is disgusting, Carolyn. You're turning a private matter into a public spectacle. You're ruining Christmas. Stop making it about you." Carolyn didn't flinch. The message was exactly what she expected, and it only strengthened her resolve. She wasn't going to let them dictate the narrative anymore. She closed the app and sat back, breathing deeply. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she had the upper hand. The support from friends and family was overwhelming. The flood of messages, likes, and shares had shown her that she wasn't alone. Her phone buzzed again. It was Sandra's message. "You've got this. They won't know what hit them." Carolyn smiled, the tension in her shoulders easing. This was just the beginning. The game had changed, and she was ready for the next move. The days following the viral post were a whirlwind. Carolyn had expected a ripple effect, but she hadn't anticipated how quickly the tide would turn. Eric and Jessica's reputation, once polished and flawless in the eyes of the world, was crumbling before her eyes. Everywhere Carolyn went, the comments followed. News outlets picked up her story, and what had started as a single post had now become a public spectacle. People were shocked, disgusted by how the couple had treated her, by how callously they'd made her the target of their cruelty. Carolyn felt a strange mix of satisfaction and sorrow as she watched the backlash unfold. They deserved it, but the wreckage left in the wake of their actions was undeniable. As her social media continued to fill with messages of support, Carolyn felt a deep sense of peace wash over her. She had spoken the truth, and now the world knew it. There was no turning back, and she didn't want to. For the first time in years, she felt free. Her finances, too, had begun to stabilize. The trust for Lily had been set up securely, her assets protected, and the legal changes she had made with Darren had ensured that Eric and Jessica would no longer benefit from her estate. It was all in place. Everything that had once felt tenuous her future, her financial security was now grounded, strong. For the first time, Carolyn felt truly in control of her life. A week later, as she sat in the quiet of her living room, sipping her morning coffee, she allowed herself a rare moment of reflection. She thought about the life she had lived, the sacrifices she'd made, and the family she had tried so hard to hold together. It felt like a lifetime ago. She was ready to move forward. Her thoughts turned to something she'd been planning in the back of her mind, a trip, a chance to breathe, to clear her head, to begin the next chapter. She had always dreamed of traveling, of seeing the world beyond the walls of her home. Now, with the weight of the past lifting, it seemed like the right time. Carolyn pulled out her laptop and began browsing flights to Europe. She'd always wanted to visit Italy, to stroll through the streets of Rome, to sit in a small cafe and just be. As she clicked through the options, a wave of excitement hit her. She was going. She needed this. She needed to disconnect, to be somewhere new, where the memories of Eric and Jessica and everything that had happened could feel far away. She clicked the Book Now button. It was done. But just as she closed her laptop, her phone rang. The screen lit up with Eric's name. A brief flash of annoyance shot through her. She knew what this was. He was probably calling to beg, to apologize for everything, now that the damage was done. Still, Carolyn hesitated for a moment before answering. "Mom?" Eric's voice came through the line. Weak, apologetic. I need to talk to you." She leaned back in her chair, taking a steady breath. She had known this day would come. The call, the apology. "Go ahead," she said, her voice calm, almost detached. "I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry for everything. I was wrong. I should never have let Jessica push me into that. I don't know what I was thinking." Carolyn's gaze drifted to the window, watching as the sun peeked through the clouds, casting light across the empty street. She felt a twinge of guilt, just a flicker, but it was fleeting. She had already made her peace. She waited for him to continue, but instead, the silence between them grew thick, heavy with everything that wasn't being said. Finally, she spoke, her voice steady. "I hear you, Eric," she said quietly. "But the truth is, it doesn't matter anymore. It's over. I'm done. You and Jessica made your choice, and now I have to live with mine." There was a long pause. Carolyn imagined him, standing on the other end of the line, probably staring at the floor, guilt etched on his face. But she couldn't bring herself to care. Not anymore. "I understand," he finally whispered. "But I'm sorry." "Goodbye, Eric," Carolyn said, her voice firm but gentle. "Take care of yourself." She ended the call before he could say anything else, her heart steady but her thoughts racing. She wasn't angry. She wasn't sad. She was simply done. As the phone clicked off, Carolyn felt a strange calm settle over her. This was it. There would be no more apologies. No more chances. Eric and Jessica had burned their bridges, and she wasn't going to stand in the ashes. Her gaze turned back to the laptop. The plane tickets were booked. The trip was real. She was leaving this behind. and for the first time, she felt like she could finally breathe. Eric's apology had come and gone, fading into the background of Carolyn's life. The weight of it had barely registered. Her decision was made. She was done. The finality of it settled in. Quiet but absolute. She no longer had to live for others, no longer had to make excuses for their behavior. They had crossed a line, and she wasn't going to stand in the ruins of their mistakes anymore. Jessica, on the other hand, wasn't so quick to let go. A few days after Carolyn had blocked Eric's call, another notification popped up on her phone. It was a text from Jessica, asking to speak with Lily. Carolyn felt a familiar pang, but it was swiftly replaced by a surge of protectiveness. She couldn't let Jessica back in, not after everything that had happened, not after how cruelly she'd been treated. With a steady hand, Carolyn blocked the number. No more manipulation. No more pretending that everything could go back to normal. She wouldn't let Lily be used as leverage in their games. She had to protect her, shield her from the toxic influence of her parents. The weight of the decision was heavy, but it also felt like the right one. Carolyn couldn't keep putting herself in harm's way, couldn't keep allowing them to control the narrative. It was time to focus on herself and on Lily's future. As the days passed, Carolyn saw the cracks in Eric and Jessica's marriage grow wider. The pressure from the public fallout had taken its toll. The perfection they had so carefully curated was falling apart in the eyes of everyone who had once admired them. Friends, family, even distant relatives. People began to see them for who they truly were. Carolyn didn't dwell on their downfall. She had a life to rebuild, a future to look forward to. The legal changes she had made were now in place, and her financial security was stabilized. She wasn't bound to anyone anymore, not by blood, not by guilt. The trust for Lily was set, and Carolyn felt a sense of relief in knowing that no matter what, her granddaughter would be safe, protected, loved. As the weight of the past lifted, Carolyn began to think about the future, her future. She had always dreamed of traveling, of experiencing the world beyond the confines of her home. A trip to Europe had always been on her mind, and now, with the financial freedom she had worked so hard for, it seemed like the perfect time. She booked the trip without hesitation. Italy. The thought of strolling through Rome's cobblestone streets, sitting in small cafes, feeling the sun on her face, it was the escape she needed. She was taking the first steps toward a new life. But just as she clicked the confirm booking button, her phone buzzed again. Another message. Another attempt to re-enter her life. It was Jessica. Carolyn didn't even open it. Instead, she turned her attention back to the laptop screen, knowing that she had already made her peace. For the first time in a long time, Carolyn was ready to move forward. She didn't need their approval, their manipulation, or their guilt. She was free. And as she stared at the plane ticket confirmation, she smiled. The future was hers to create. The weight of her decision settled firmly in Carolyn's chest as she left Darren's office. She had made it official. Eric and Jessica were out of her life, legally and emotionally. The finality of the legal documents, her will, the power of attorney, the trust for Lily was now in place. There was no going back. She had set herself free. Her mind felt clear. The fog of years spent trying to please them finally lifted. It was strange, almost too quiet, but Carolyn welcomed the stillness. She no longer had to bear the weight of their expectations or their manipulation. It was time to move forward. Back home, she sat at her desk and began to write. The letter wasn't for them. Not really. It was for her, a way to close the door on this chapter for good. She wrote carefully, her thoughts steady as she put pen to paper. Dear Eric and Jessica, I've spent years trying to make this family work. I've given all that I had, and in return, I've been belittled, manipulated, and humiliated. You made your choice when you kicked me out on Christmas, when you made a game out of my pain. I won't keep pretending it doesn't matter anymore. You have no place in my life. This is the last time I'll ever look back. You've shown me who you really are, and I have to accept that you don't want me. I've accepted it. It's time for me to move on. I'm done. Goodbye. Carolyn. She folded the letter carefully, sealed it in an envelope, and placed it in the drawer. It was done. She was done. The years of bitterness, guilt, and hope for reconciliation had dissolved into a quiet sense of relief. There would be no more calls, no more attempts at making things right. She was free. As the days passed, Carolyn began to focus on her future. She'd booked the trip to Italy, a long-awaited dream, and for the first time, she felt truly excited. The thought of wandering the streets of Rome, of sitting in cafes and savoring every moment, filled her with anticipation. It wasn't just an escape. It was her first step into a new life, one that was hers to create. But even as she packed her bags, she could feel the shift inside her. For the first time in years, she wasn't defined by her relationship with Eric and Jessica. She was defined by her own choices, by her own strength. The past had tried to bind her, to keep her locked in place, but she had broken free. The letter was sent, and there would be no reply. Eric and Jessica would have to live with the consequences of their actions. Carolyn wasn't angry. She wasn't even sad anymore. She was done. As she boarded the plane to Italy, she smiled, feeling the weight of her old life fall away. She was moving forward, and this time, there was nothing holding her back. The future was wide open, and it was hers to claim. Carolyn stepped off the plane in Rome, the warm Mediterranean air filling her lungs. For the first time in years, she felt light, like she was shedding the weight of a lifetime with each step. The chaos of her past, the hurt, the betrayal faded into the background as she walked through the airport, her heart beating with anticipation for the unknown. The city greeted her like an old friend. The cobblestone streets, the laughter spilling from cafes, the scent of fresh pastries, everything felt alive, fresh, and full of possibility. Carolyn had dreamed of this moment for so long. She was no longer the woman trapped by family drama and unresolved pain. She was free. As she navigated through the winding streets of Rome, Carolyn felt a quiet joy settle in her chest. She wandered through the vibrant neighborhoods, letting the energy of the city wash over her. The history in every stone, the warmth of the sun on her face, the simple pleasure of a cappuccino in a tiny piazza, these were the moments she'd been waiting for. She was no longer bound by expectations, by the ties of an unhealthy family dynamic. She was carving out a space for herself in the world, and it felt right. She met new people too, locals who shared their favorite spots and hidden gems, travelers who had stories to tell. The world was open to her, and Carolyn embraced it fully. With each new connection, she shed more of the person she had once been. The woman who had always been second-guessing herself, always worrying about what others thought, always trying to hold her family together despite everything. Carolyn didn't miss Eric or Jessica. Their drama was distant, a fleeting memory. The weight of their actions, their cruelty, felt smaller with each passing day. She no longer carried the hurt from their betrayal. It had taken time, but slowly their toxic influence unraveled, leaving room for her own happiness to grow. One evening, as Carolyn sat in a cafe overlooking the Tiber River, watching the sunset paint the sky with oranges and purples, she felt the pull to reflect. This new life, this freedom, wasn't just about escaping her past. It was about rediscovering who she was, independent of everything she'd been made to believe. The peace she had found here, in this beautiful city, wasn't just external. It was internal. She decided to reconnect with old friends back home, the ones who had stuck by her through the worst of it, and share the new life she was building. She had learned the hard way that true strength came from letting go, from accepting that some relationships were meant to end for a reason. And it was in that acceptance that she found her true power. But there was one more thing Carolyn needed to do. A feeling had been growing inside her, a need to share her story, her experiences, her lessons they could help others. She began to write, the words flowing effortlessly as she chronicled her journey from betrayal to freedom. It wasn't just a story of revenge, but a story of healing and empowerment. She wrote late into the night, her fingers moving across the keyboard with purpose. As the days turned into weeks, Carolyn's book began to take shape. She wrote about the importance of standing up for yourself, about breaking free from toxic cycles, about the strength that comes from embracing your own truth. It was cathartic, liberating even. Writing became her way of not only healing but of turning her pain into something meaningful. She knew her story could inspire others, could give them the courage to reclaim their lives. Soon, the word spread. People reached out to her from all over the world, women who had faced similar struggles, who had been manipulated, controlled, and silenced. They saw Carolyn's story and found their own voices in it. She had unknowingly become a source of strength for so many. One afternoon, as Carolyn sat at her desk, she received a message from a publisher who had heard about her work. They wanted to help her publish her book. The possibility of her story reaching even more people was surreal, but as she sat back and read the message, Carolyn realized something important. She had already succeeded. She had built a new life, a life filled with purpose, freedom, and the knowledge that she had the strength to move forward, no matter what. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel the need to look back. Eric and Jessica's shadows were gone, and in their place was a future Carolyn was actively creating, one filled with new beginnings, new connections, and the promise of everything she deserved. Her phone buzzed. Another message, this time from Sandra. "You're doing it, Carolyn. You've found your way." A smile tugged at the corners of Carolyn's lips as she set the phone down. It wasn't just about her story anymore, it was about others finding theirs too. And as she looked out over the Roman skyline, the sunset painting the sky in hues of hope, Carolyn knew this was only the beginning. The life she had always dreamed of was now hers, and nothing, not even the ghosts of her past, could take it away. Carolyn's book, Reclaiming the Light, had become a bestseller, a movement in its own right. The flood of messages, emails, and comments from women around the world, women who had experienced similar betrayals, struggles, and triumphs, was overwhelming. She had unknowingly become a voice for those who felt silenced, a beacon of strength and hope for those lost in toxic family dynamics. Her first public speaking engagement came just weeks after her book's release. Carolyn stood backstage, feeling a calm excitement as she prepared to speak at a women's conference. The room was packed with faces full of curiosity and anticipation. She had come a long way from the woman who once felt trapped in her family's chaos. Now, she was here to help others find their own strength. When Carolyn took the stage, there was no script. She spoke from her heart, sharing her journey of betrayal, heartbreak, and eventual freedom. "I know what it feels like to lose everything, to be made to feel small, but I also know what it feels like to find yourself again," she said, her voice steady. "This is a story about reclaiming your life no matter what it takes." The room responded with a mixture of quiet reflection and audible nods. Carolyn felt the weight of her own words settle deeply inside her. This was why she had fought so hard. This was the purpose she'd found, lifting others up through her own experience. As she finished, the applause wasn't just for her, but for all the women who saw their own stories reflected in hers. She had given them a voice, a way out. In the months that followed, Carolyn's speaking invitations increased. She spoke at conferences, appeared on podcasts, and became a sought-after guest on national television. With each new appearance, the reach of her story expanded, touching more lives. Women who had been silenced for years began to reclaim their own voices, just as Carolyn had. But Carolyn didn't stop there. Her journey wasn't just about telling her story, it was about creating lasting change. She founded a nonprofit focused on supporting women in toxic family dynamics, offering legal advice, emotional support, and a safe place to heal. The foundation grew quickly, helping countless women find the courage to leave behind the families and situations that held them back. Carolyn saw firsthand the power of what she was building. She was no longer just a survivor. She was a leader, a mentor, someone who could change lives. Meanwhile, Eric and Jessica's lives continued to unravel. Their public image, once perfect and unshakable, was now fractured beyond repair. No matter how hard they tried to rebuild their marriage or restore their reputation, they couldn't escape the truth. Carolyn had moved on, leaving them behind in the dust. As she sat in her office one evening, a message from Sandra popped up. "You've done it, Carolyn. You've built something that will last." Carolyn smiled, taking a deep breath. She had come so far. She wasn't just reclaiming her life. She was building a legacy, one that would inspire women for generations to come. And for the first time, Carolyn realized that this was exactly where she was meant to be. Carolyn stood backstage, the weight of the Empowerment Award in her hands. The room before her was filled with women whose stories mirrored her own. Her journey from betrayal to strength had led her here. And now, she was being recognized for the work she had done helping women rebuild their lives after emotional turmoil. The applause was overwhelming, but Carolyn had learned to embrace it. She had spent too many years shrinking away from recognition, too many years trying to hide in the background. But this was different. She had earned this moment. As she took the stage, the microphone felt familiar now, no longer an instrument of nervousness, but of purpose. I stand here not as someone who was broken, but as someone who chose to rise, she began, her voice steady. I stand here for every woman who thought they couldn't make it, for every woman who felt invisible. We are the stories we tell ourselves, and I choose to tell mine with strength, with power, and with love. The room erupted in applause again, but Carolyn wasn't just receiving their admiration. She was giving it right back. She was giving them hope. Her work with her foundation, helping women navigate toxic family dynamics, had flourished. Legal support, emotional guidance, and safe spaces had been created, but more importantly, lives had been transformed. Carolyn had taken her pain and turned it into something that empowered others. But even as her new life flourished, Eric and Jessica hadn't let go. Messages from them started trickling in, first from Eric. Mom, we need to talk. I'm sorry for everything. Let's fix this. For a moment, Carolyn's heart lurched. The past always had a way of creeping back in, especially in moments of triumph. But then, she remembered. She had learned that some things weren't meant to be fixed. She had learned the value of walking away. She typed a quick response. I've built a life without you, Eric. I've let go. You should too. Goodbye. As she hit send, the weight she had carried for years lifted. There would be no more guilt, no more second-guessing. She had freed herself. Their lives could continue to unravel, but hers would move forward, filled with purpose. In the weeks that followed, Carolyn's foundation grew, reaching more women than ever before. She also began a mentorship program for young women, helping them navigate their own difficult family situations. They learned to find their voices, just as she had. Watching them grow gave Carolyn a sense of fulfillment she had never known before. Her story, once a source of pain, was now a source of inspiration for so many. And as she reflected on how far she had come, Carolyn realized something profound. She had built something bigger than herself, a legacy. And for the first time in years, Carolyn knew she was exactly where she was meant to be. Carolyn stood in the kitchen, the soft hum of the morning light pouring through the windows, as Lily carefully traced shapes on a piece of paper at the kitchen table. The bond they shared had deepened in ways Carolyn hadn't thought possible. Without the weight of Eric and Jessica's toxic influence, Lily had flourished, and so had their relationship. They spent their weekends exploring the city, walking through parks, and visiting museums. Lily's laughter had become a constant soundtrack to Carolyn's days. The little girl had never looked more alive, more free. She had a sparkle in her eyes that hadn't been there before, and it made Carolyn's heart swell with pride. They had created a world together, one filled with love and respect, without the shadows of manipulation hanging over them. Grandma, look! Lily's voice broke through Carolyn's thoughts, drawing her attention to the colorful picture she had drawn. A sun, a house, a tree, and two people holding hands. It's us, Lily said, beaming. Carolyn bent down to admire the drawing, her heart swelling. It's beautiful, sweetheart. I love it. Lily smiled up at her, her eyes wide with trust and admiration. The years of hardship seemed like distant memories, swallowed up by the love and freedom they now shared. Carolyn had built this world for Lily, a place where she could grow without fear, without manipulation, and most importantly, without the guilt of others' actions weighing her down. As the days passed, Carolyn continued to watch Lily grow into a confident, compassionate young girl. She taught her how to stand up for herself, how to respect others, and how to value her own worth. "You're strong, Lily," Carolyn would tell her. "You don't have to take anything less than you deserve." It wasn't just about protecting Lily from harm. It was about teaching her the tools to navigate the world with strength and self-respect. Carolyn made sure Lily knew that family didn't have to mean toxic dynamics, that respect and love were non-negotiable. Their time together was filled with lessons on empathy, boundaries, and how to be a true friend to yourself and others. But even as Carolyn focused on building a new life, Eric and Jessica were still trying to rebuild theirs. The news was hard to escape, with every failed attempt at reconciliation playing out in the public eye. Carolyn couldn't help but watch from a distance. She saw the cracks in their marriage widen, their attempts at redemption growing increasingly futile. The world was watching them fall apart, just as they had watched her. They couldn't repair what had been broken. And Carolyn realized, with quiet clarity, that she was better off without them. It had taken time, but she had grown beyond the need for their approval or their presence in her life. The wounds they had inflicted had scarred her, yes, but she had healed in ways they would never understand. Their attempts to pull her back into their narrative, to make her feel responsible for their dysfunction, no longer had any power over her. Instead, Carolyn poured herself into her work. Her foundation had expanded, and with it, her impact. She wasn't just helping women, she was leading a movement, one that reached beyond borders and backgrounds. She was recognized as a leader in the empowerment space, her story serving as a beacon for those who felt trapped. She didn't just speak about strength, she lived it every day. It wasn't long before she was invited to speak at one of the largest women's conferences in the world. Thousands of women, all seeking guidance, gathered to hear her story. Carolyn's heart raced as she stepped onto the stage, but the nerves didn't control her anymore. She had found her voice, her true purpose, and now it would be heard. The applause that followed her speech was deafening, but it wasn't about the applause. It wasn't about the recognition. It was about the women in the audience, their faces filled with hope, their eyes shining with the possibility that they too could reclaim their lives. Carolyn knew that her work had only just begun. She had opened a door for them, and they were walking through it, one step at a time. As she left the stage that day, surrounded by women who approached her with gratitude and shared stories, Carolyn felt a sense of peace she had never known before. She was no longer defined by her past, but by the future she was helping to create. She had learned that family wasn't always about blood. It was about those who stood by you, who respected you, and who lifted you up. Her life, her legacy, was now hers to define. And with each woman she helped, each life she touched, Carolyn knew that this was exactly where she was meant to be. The email landed in Carolyn's inbox like a wave of unexpected excitement. We would be honored to have you as a guest on the morning show to discuss your book, your journey, and the work you're doing with your foundation. The invitation had come with no warning, but Carolyn knew exactly what it meant. It wasn't just another interview, it was a chance to reach millions of women, to continue the work she had started. She had become a voice, and now the world was listening. As she sat at her desk, staring at the email, Carolyn's heart beat a little faster. The show was one of the largest in the country, seen by millions. She had thought about this moment many times, but now that it was here, it felt surreal. There was a time when she would have doubted herself, questioned whether she was ready. But now, she knew she was. She had been ready for this all along. The days leading up to the appearance were filled with anticipation. Carolyn spoke with her team about what she would say, but in the back of her mind, she knew that it wouldn't be about rehearsed lines or perfect answers. It would be about telling her truth, letting her story speak for itself. When the day arrived, Carolyn entered the studio with a calm confidence she hadn't thought herself capable of just a few years ago. The set was grand, filled with bright lights and cameras, but none of it intimidated her. This was her space now, a space she had earned. She sat down across from the host, a woman whose polished demeanor only added to the gravity of the moment. The cameras rolled, and Carolyn spoke. I'm here today because I want every woman who's listening to know that you are not defined by your past. You are not your mistakes, and you are not the mistakes of others. My story isn't just mine, it's the story of countless women who have had to fight to reclaim their lives. The words flowed with ease, as if the journey she had taken had prepared her for this exact moment. She spoke about her foundation, the women she had helped, and the importance of not letting family betrayal dictate your self-worth. The story of how she had found her voice resonated with the audience, and the responses from viewers flooded in almost immediately. Social media buzzed with praise, with women sharing their own stories of survival. The next day, Carolyn woke up to the reality of how far her influence had reached. Her foundation's website had crashed under the influx of visitors, and the messages of gratitude flooded her inbox. Women from all walks of life were reaching out, thanking her for sharing her journey. It was more than just a segment on a talk show, it was a movement. Meanwhile, Eric and Jessica's attempts to patch up their marriage and regain some semblance of normalcy continued to play out in the media. Their efforts to appear united and redeemed fell flat, as the public no longer viewed them through the lens of perfection. Their image, once carefully curated, had been permanently tarnished by their treatment of Carolyn. The world could see them for what they were now, two people who had abandoned their family and failed to repair the damage. Carolyn, however, no longer cared. She had moved on from the broken pieces of her past. She didn't need to dwell on their failures. The power, the control, was no longer theirs. It was hers. As the weeks went by, Carolyn's work continued to expand. Her foundation grew internationally, reaching women in countries where access to support and resources had previously been limited. She began speaking at global conferences, sharing her message of empowerment with women across the world. The foundation's reach stretched beyond borders, and Carolyn found herself leading a network of women who supported each other, lifted each other up, and reclaimed their lives together. Through it all, Carolyn reflected on how far she had come. She thought about the woman who once thought she couldn't escape the web of family betrayal, the woman who had believed she was trapped in a life defined by others' choices. That woman felt so distant now, a version of herself she no longer recognized. Now, Carolyn knew that the strength she had discovered was not just in surviving but in thriving. She had taken control of her own narrative, built a life filled with purpose, and made a difference in the lives of thousands. Her story, once filled with pain, had become a story of transformation. She wasn't just helping women rebuild their lives, she was changing the world. As she sat in her office one quiet evening, watching the sunset over the city, Carolyn felt a deep sense of fulfillment. She had created something lasting, something real. And as she looked forward to the future, to the new lives she would continue to help shape, she smiled. This was only the beginning. The best was yet to come. The soft hum of the waves lapped at the shore as Carolyn sat on the balcony of the villa, the Mediterranean breeze brushing against her skin. She took a slow, deliberate sip of her wine, feeling the weight of the past years wash away with each passing moment. For so long she had lived for others, bending, contorting, sacrificing. But now, for the first time, Carolyn was living for herself. The life she had fought for, the life she deserved, was finally here. Her foundation had grown beyond her wildest dreams. It had expanded into multiple countries, with programs supporting women from all walks of life, helping them rebuild, recover, and reclaim their dignity. She had become a recognized leader in women's empowerment, speaking at international conferences, writing, mentoring. But it wasn't the accolades that mattered most to her. It was the women whose lives she had touched, whose stories were now unfolding with hope. As she looked out at the horizon, Carolyn thought about how far she had come. She remembered the woman who had once felt trapped in a house of pain, manipulated and belittled, unsure of who she could trust. That woman, that version of herself, felt so distant now. Every challenge, every heartbreak had led her here. She had learned to let go, to move forward, to grow. She had learned that true strength wasn't about fighting for approval from others. It was about fighting for herself. Her relationship with Lily had flourished in ways Carolyn couldn't have imagined. They had created their own world, one based on love, respect, and the freedom to simply be. Carolyn had become more than a grandmother. She had become Lily's greatest ally, her mentor, her safe haven. Together, they had built a life filled with joy, a stark contrast to the fear and manipulation that once ruled their days. "Grandma," Lily said one afternoon, running up to Carolyn with a piece of paper in her hand. "I made something for you." She handed Carolyn a drawing, a sun, a house, and two people standing hand in hand beneath the tree. "It's beautiful, sweetheart," Carolyn said, her voice thick with emotion. "It's perfect." Lily looked up at her, eyes shining. "I made it because we're happy now." Carolyn couldn't help the tears that welled up in her eyes. The child's simple words said everything. They were happy now, and it was a happiness they had built together. No more fear, no more manipulation, just the peace of knowing that love could thrive, even in the wake of destruction. The vacations had become more frequent, quiet retreats to places Carolyn had always dreamed of visiting. She had spent so many years putting off her own desires, thinking there would always be time. But now, every new destination felt like an affirmation that the life she had fought so hard for was finally here. But her work wasn't done. Carolyn continued to build her foundation, reaching more women and expanding her reach. She had started something that couldn't be undone, something that would continue to thrive long after she was gone. She had created a legacy, one that wasn't built on the approval of others but on the genuine desire to make the world a better place for those who had been silenced for too long. Even as she relaxed in this moment of well-earned peace, Carolyn knew that the fight would never truly end. There were still so many women to help, so many lives to touch. But for now, she allowed herself to breathe, to enjoy the fruits of her labor, and to savor the love she had built with Lily, with friends, and with herself. She thought of Eric and Jessica, and how their lives had become a shadow of what they once were. Their efforts to patch things up, to regain their reputation, had fallen flat. The world had seen through the cracks in their carefully constructed image. Carolyn knew that they would never be able to touch her life again, not in the way they had once tried to. As the sun dipped beneath the horizon, painting the sky in hues of gold and pink, Carolyn smiled softly to herself. She had built a life that was hers to own, one that would never be touched by the past. She had risen above the pain and the heartbreak, and in doing so, had created something powerful, something real. She had proved them wrong. They thought she'd crumble. Instead, she built a life they would never touch.